The day will come where the people in the West will not leave a single Arab man, woman, or child living in their lands. The drums are kind of beating to that tune. Presidents, former presidents, and potential new presidents are speaking about how part of their policy is to implement the mass deportation of immigrants and refugees from their country. Even talks at times of concentration camps. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الامر والمهدي وسلم تسليما. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear sister Janata. Good to have you here.
Great to have you here too. It's an honor.
God bless you, my daughter. So today we're going to continue in our discussion regarding the narrations that exist with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that speak about how in the Qa'im is a sunnah from the sunnahs of the prophets and the messengers. This group of narrations are important because they give us insight into some of the things that will occur during the da'wah of the Qa'im, and it draws upon the repetition of particular events that take place in the da'wahs of the previous prophets and messengers, or the calls of the previous prophets and messengers. And so we spoke in the previous episodes about how the Qa'im has a sunnah, something which parallels the da'wah of Noah. We spoke about how he has that which parallels the da'wah of Job, and we spoke about other prophets and messengers. And today we will speak about Moses. So the hadith says, and in the Qa'im is a sunnah from the sunnahs of Moses. And then it says, as for the sunnah of Moses, he's fearful and he's looking, watching, as if he's looking over his shoulders or watching. So he's afraid and he's watching. He's fearful in anticipation. This is what the narration says. And the Arabic term that it uses for this particular narration is khaif yatraqab. Okay? To understand what it is that this is referring to, we have to go back to the Holy Quran, because we find the exact same phrase being used in reference to the story of Moses in Surah Al-Qasas. All right? And Surah Al-Qasas was a surah that came down upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi during some very difficult years right before his migration from Mecca to Medina. Okay? So we have now something which ties the words that were being used in the narration to a particular surah in the Quran, and the surah in the Quran is the surah of Al-Qasas, which means the stories, and it is a surah which tells the stories of the prophets and the messengers. And this surah came down during the time that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was preparing to migrate from Mecca to Medina, and his heart was very heavy. Okay, so we're going to come back to this story of the Prophet Muhammad as he was migrating, and what is the tie between that and between the sunnah that happens in the da'wah of the Qa'im, which parallels also the da'wah of Moses. But first, let us look at the verse in the Quran which speaks about that uses this term khaif yatraqab, and also narrate the story of Moses as it is told in Surah Al-Qasas. So basically we get this story of Moses, and the term is being used in one of the verses that's discussing Moses. And the story, those few verses are talking about how Musa alayhi salam, was living amongst the people. And he came across a man from his Shia. And the man from his Shia was asking him for support. He was yelling. He heard one of the Israelites. And at this point now, Moses realizes that he is an Israelite and this is one of his people. In fact, it refers to this individual as one of his Shia. So that means that Moses at that time had established a call. He had established a dawah. He was calling people towards his message, but in secret, right? Because he's still in Egypt. This is before he goes to Midian. All right. So Moses now, he's in Egypt. He realizes that he's a prophet. He's being called by one of his Shia. His Shia is yelling out to him, Moses, Moses. And he goes to see why it is that he is being called. And it is there where it doesn't say this next part in the Quran, but when we look into the Hebrew sources, right, which narrate this story, as well as some of the hadiths, and we piece together the entire puzzle, what we find is the story is narrated as such. One of the followers of Moses calls out to him. He goes to see what's going on. He finds that this man is yelling his name, telling him that something horrible had happened to him. Moses asks him, what is it that happened to you? He says to him that one of the Egyptian soldiers had went into his house and had tied him up and had proceeded to rape his wife in front of his very own eyes. Now remember, in the same surah, Surah Al-Qasas, it states in there that Pharaoh and his soldiers were doing two things to the Hebrews. One of them was that they were basically killing or slaughtering their children. And this had happened earlier as the Pharaoh that preceded the one that was ruling in the time of Moses' adulthood had received information that there would be a child that was going to take his throne. And so he commanded that all of the Hebrew children be slaughtered. This is something which took place before. So they slaughter the children of the Israelites. And the second thing that they do is that they basically take advantage of their women. They deem for themselves permissible the flesh of the Israelite women, meaning they rape them, right? They sexually assault them. So they slaughter the children and they sexually assault the women. Those were the two things that the Egyptians were doing to the Israelites. And so now in this story, during Moses' adulthood, he's encountering one of his followers and his follower is telling him that the Egyptians had raped his woman in front of his own eyes, right? And so he was freaking out. Moses was extremely infuriated when he heard this news. And so he went forth and he proceeded to strike the Egyptian who was guilty of this crime. And this resulted in the death of the Egyptian soldier. And Moses ended up covering his body with the sand in order to, hide what took place. And then he went forward in his day-to-day life. The next day, though, he ends up hearing the same man who was crying for his help before, crying for his help again. And there was a very big problem. So he goes to the man and he says, what's going on? And he tells him, Moses, I need you to save me again. What's going on? What's going on is that now there are others that want to kill me. Who wants to kill you? The family of my wife wants to kill me. What had happened? Well, according to the Hebrew law, the Jewish law, the Abrahamic law, if a Jew, right, or one of the children of Abraham was married to a woman, if this woman had slept with or had sexual intercourse with another man in any way, shape, or form, whether she was divorced and she ended up sleeping with somebody else or she cheated on her husband, it was never permissible for the husband to ever get back with her. So if the wife had ever been with a man other than her husband, it was as if she was soiled. It was as if she was, she had become impure, and she was no longer ever allowed to be, with her husband again. And so the man, the husband of the raped woman, in order that he uphold the laws of God, he said to his wife after the incident of the rape, now you have been raped. Another man has fallen upon you. There is no way. It is impermissible that I ever gather with you again in the bed. You are no longer halal for me. You're no longer kosher. You're no longer permissible for me. I cannot be with you anymore. And this caused her to go into a fit of rage and fury. She was so upset. She said to the husband, what are you even talking about? I didn't cheat on you. We didn't divorce. This happened against my own will. You didn't protect me. I was raped, for God's sake. Well, they disagreed. She thought that the law didn't apply. He thought that the law did apply. And she ended up crying her heart out, and she ran back to her family members and she complained about her husband, and she told them about all which had happened. Her family members, infuriated, they came down and they began to fight with the husband. And they said, what are you talking about? What are you trying to do? Ruin the reputation of our family? You're trying to throw out your wife. You're trying to rid yourself of the responsibilities which you had when you're the one that didn't even protect her against. It would have been more honorable for you to die, protecting your wife from rape, than what you did just standing by. And then at the same time, you want to throw our sister out, our daughter out, onto the earth. This will never happen. We're going to kill you. Okay? And so Moses ended up going with the man after hearing this tragic story, and he went forward to try to make peace between the Israelites, these Hebrews, the family of his wife, and the husband who had initially come forward to seek Moses' help. When they all gathered together, as they saw Moses approaching from a distance alongside with the husband, one of the family members of the wife yelled out, and he said to Moses, what are you coming for? Are you coming here to kill us like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? And so when he heard those words, fear entered into the heart of Moses, because he knew now that the event that had taken place, which he thought nobody knew about except for him and perhaps the man who was from his Shia who complained to him, he realized that this secret was not kept, and that there had been a lot of talking and telling, and that the rumor had gone out. And now he knew and realized that he was being threatened publicly by the family of this woman, and that means that basically they could go at any moment and tell Pharaoh and his government about Moses. In fact, they might perceive that Moses is trying to kill them, so out of fear they would go and they would seek Pharaoh and his army's assistance against Moses. And so it became a very dangerous situation for Moses, and Moses instantly withdraws from the scene. He says that this is a work of the devil, and he goes forward, and from that moment on he is fearful, and he's kind of in anticipation, waiting for the soldiers to begin to come after him, or Pharaoh to look for him, which is in fact exactly what ends up happening. The rumor ends up spreading all over Egypt, and the Pharaoh hears that Moses had committed this act. And so you have this interesting twist of events in the story, where it's like Moses, in a deed where he's actually trying to serve his people and trying to help his people by committing this act and attacking the Egyptians, he's actually betrayed by his own people. And his people are the ones that inform the authorities against him and send the police of Pharaoh against him and the soldiers to look for him. And they're the ones that alert the people about Moses' doings. Moses ends up making hijrah. He migrates after that as a result of that. And he's absent from his people for 28 years. And there's another narration that says that in the qa'im is a sunnah from the sunnahs of Moses, and that is that he's khaif, yatarqab, he's fearful and he's in anticipation. And in the same time, the absence is also another sunnah. And one of the companions asked one of the imams, and how long was Moses absent for? And they said 28 years. Moses had gone to Midian, and that's where he met Jethro, or Shu'aib, alayhi salam, and he marries his daughter and he establishes a life there before eventually returning back to the Israelites. And there's also other narrations that state that basically Moses, when he had committed the act of the murder of the Egyptian, that he was 40 years old, and he went absent for another 40 years. And when he crossed the Red Sea and led the Israelites out of there, he was 80 years old. And then he remained an additional 40 years with them in the desert of Sinai, in the Tih, or walking around, wandering around, the great wandering of the Israelites. And he passes away at the age of 120 years old. Nonetheless, so we have this amazing story that took place, and we'll stop there because the story of Moses is incredibly long, and it is that part that we wanted to highlight for the sake of the narration which we're speaking about today. And so we have this interesting situation. Narrations have stated that the same condition repeated itself in the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet, that the Prophet Muhammad also was fearful and in anticipation, and he was watching over his shoulder, expecting death. And this was during the time right before he migrates from Mecca to Medina. And that God had brought down these verses reminding him of the story of Moses in order to bring comfort to his heart because of that which he was going through. The Quraysh, the people that were in Mecca at the time, had now caught wind of the da'wah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were making accusations against him, not accusations that he was murdering anybody like they did with Moses. But the sunnah was in the fear and anticipation and looking over the shoulders. They were accusing him of other things, of being a fraudster, of being a thief, of stealing people's monies, of being a person who was trying to lead a coup d'etat in the city, of somebody who was using mind control, and poetry in order to brainwash the youth of the area, of somebody who was trying to lead a revolt amongst the slaves. So they were accusing him nonetheless of particular crimes, and they were conspiring to murder him. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had to do what Moses did, and that was essentially he had to rise up and he had to take the believers that were with him and take his family, and they had to migrate from Mecca to Medina. So you have now this idea of the words خائف يترقب, fearful and in anticipation, being tied with an act of migration which follows after it, both in the stories of Moses and the story of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so when we find these words being repeated with the qa'im, and saying that the qa'im will have a sunnah from the sunnahs of Moses, and that is that he's kha'if yatarakkab, then that basically means that the main things that occurred in both the da'was of Moses and Muhammad would probably occur in regards to the qa'im. And that is what? And that is that he would be possibly turned in by his people, his own Shia, or people that he thought were his Shia but are actually works of the devil. These people that end up betraying him, people like the family of the wife, or like the person from a Shia who had a big mouth, who was exposing what Moses did and spreading the rumor around. The same thing could possibly happen in the time of the Qa'im, where you might have followers of the Qa'im who would apostate, and then they would spread rumors about him, or even report him to the authorities in his time, in order to because they are fearful from him, or they want to basically destroy his affair or destroy his matter because of some personal inner fighting that's taking place between them. Because remember, there was inner fighting that was taking place. It was a familial matter that was taking place between the man and his wife. And because of it, Moses' name and his dawah got dragged in the midst of it. And something like this could occur. They could have accusations against the Qa'im, like in the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he's a thief, that he's trying to do this or that he's a cult leader, that he's brainwashing people. And all of these things could result in the end in the Qa'im migrating along with his community, perhaps once, perhaps several times, from one country to another country, in order that he may be left in peace, or that he may also practice his religion freely. You find something really interesting as well, Janetta, and that is this parallel that is taking place between the society in which Moses and his people existed, and between today's society that's on planet Earth, right? That is existing especially in the Western nations. You have during the time of Pharaoh, and his king, his guards, right, that were appointed by the king, and the little ministers and the people that were governors in the various regions of Egypt, they gathered one day with the king, and they had said, we need to discuss an important matter. The king said, what is the matter? He said, they said, we have to discuss the Israelites. They're growing in number drastically. All right. So here you have a situation where you have the authorities, the government in ancient Egypt, afraid about the refugees, the migrants that had come to settle in their country. And they were afraid because of the fact that they were growing rapidly, and they had their own language, and they had their own culture and their own religion. You find the exact same thing taking place today in the West, whether it's in America or it's in the European countries or Australia or New Zealand. You have this imminent fear that the governments have, and the rise of the far right because they are all in fear of the increase of the migrant population in their countries. Who also have their own culture, because most of them are Muslim, right? And come from Muslim lands. They have their own culture. They have their own religion. And they have their own kind of little societies and own language. And they have lots of children, unlike the populations in the West. You might have many families in the West, like Sweden, for example. It's totally normal for a woman and a man to get married and not have kids at all, or that they have a child or two at a much later age. Well, you have these Arabs and these Muslims, they're getting married, they're having big families, they have lots of children, they're sticking to their own culture. You have in Germany, you have a Turkish Muslim population, which is huge. Now you have an Iraqi and Syrian population, which is huge. They're all Muslim. They all have their own culture, their own language, their own traditions. They have many babies. The same things happening in the UK. And you even have these riots that have taken place recently as a result of that. And so you have the same thing taking place in the West as you once did in ancient Egypt. And so the government of ancient Egypt, they gathered together and they said, what are we going to do about this? So they came up with a conspiracy. They said, what we're going to do is we are going to tell the people that we need workers, okay? And we're going to rally everybody in the land. We're going to make a great call and call everybody to work to build the great city of Ramses and other cities in ancient Egypt. And once we get volunteers who will come forward and build these cities in exchange for wage, right? We will withdraw slowly the Egyptian population and we will enslave the Hebrew population and force them to work without wage. We will busy them. And by busying them from that which it is that they are busying them with work, we will take them away from their wives and they will not have a chance to have any more children. All right. And so there was a conspiracy against the Hebrews to make their populations decrease in number, right? And to eventually enslave them. Well, we find also that in these Western nations, we have that they've made similar conspiracies to control the Muslim populations in their country, but through other ways. They utilize the social services and they utilize the different programs that they have to force the adults to go into these language and cultural lessons in order that they may strip them of their identity and of their language, and they allow the police forces and pass laws like they passed in Sweden, which basically state that if there is a child who wants access to social media or wants to have a phone and the parent doesn't allow them to have social media or access to their phone, that this parent could be jailed just for the mere prohibiting them from their own child from accessing a phone or social media. If a parent does not allow their child, is another law that they have, from hanging out with particular friends that they want to hang out with, this person could be jailed. The parents could be jailed. They pass laws that state that if a parent doesn't want their child to have sexual intercourse or prevents the child from having sexual intercourse in high school or in junior high, that this parent could be deemed abusive and could be jailed or their children taken away from them. And you find that social media is filled with videos where the social services comes in and they do exactly that. They break up the homes of the gypsies. They break up the homes of the Arabs and the Muslims. They take the children away. They brainwash them. That is the modern day pharaonic conspiracy that the Western nations have against the Arabs in order to destroy their populations. You also have narrations from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and from the Prophet Muhammad that speak about how the day will come where the people in the West will not leave a single Arab man, woman, or child living in their lands. And we find also that the drums are kind of beating to that tune, whereby laws are being proposed that would and presidents, former presidents, and potential new presidents are speaking about how part of their policy is to implement the mass deportation of immigrants and refugees from their country, and even talks at times of concentration camps and draconic laws that would basically, they would allow the government to classify anybody as a dangerous terrorist. So you have a conspiracy against the refugees that are living in their land. In the Mosaic times, you have it also taking place in this time. And so in the dawah of the Qa'im, you have this sunnah that repeats itself, where you have, unfortunately, former followers of the faith that turn against the Qa'im at different times, and they attempt to utilize the pharaonic forces against him, and you find the police making unnecessary raids or doing other things against them during their time in Sweden or in other countries that they were in, for example. Or it might happen also in the future, and the goal of this is always one, and that is the destruction of, the modern day Moses, the Qa'im in his time and his community, and in order that he may protect his community and protect his dawah, because essentially the word fearful, whether it was for Moses or for Muhammad or for the Qa'im, the fear there was not in fear of being killed, but rather, or in fear of being imprisoned, but rather it was fear over the dawah itself, the dawah of God, having worry about the continuity of the dawah of God. And so, they would move to another country where perhaps they had more freedoms to practice their faith. And that's exactly what you find happening with Moses. He goes to Midian, he practices faith freely. Muhammad, he goes to Medina, he practices his faith freely. The faith becomes stronger, the dawah becomes stronger, Islam rises, it becomes stronger in that new country where they're at, and eventually they go back to the old country. So, and in the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, there's also this reference to migration, or the constant migration that the companions of the Qa'im have to undergo with him. In the narration where it describes his companions, and it says that their house is on their back, all right? So that means that they have no particular area in which they stay for a long period of time. There's no permanent base for the companions of the Qa'im. They are like gypsies. They are like wanderers in the land. They're like the companions of Jesus Christ, who had to go forward and wander around Rome and India and Constantinople and Africa. The same thing takes place with the companions of the Qa'im. They are wanderers. They wander around with him, and they migrate from one place to another, seeking to free themselves from the dangers that are associated with the hypocrites in their midst, and also with the hand of the tyrant who's constantly, above them. And I think that another important thing that we have to, remember and take from this story is that, here, my goodness, you have Moses and you have Muhammad being accused of horrible things, right? being fugitives, essentially on the run. And just because they are fugitives, and just because they are being accused of things, whether it is a true accusation, like in the case of Moses, or it's false accusations, like in the case of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, none of these accusations, these filthy accusations that are made by the hypocrites or by the establishment or the government, are enough of a reason for people to disbelieve in Moses or Muhammad. And the same thing with the Qa'im. Rather, the narrations state that there would be even more accusations against the Qa'im, and that he'll have a harsher and harder time with his people than even the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did in his time, because the Prophet Muhammad was facing his people while they were worshipping sticks and stones, but the Qa'im is facing people whom each and every one of them thinks that they can interpret the Quran more than him, and so it becomes a messy and a nasty situation. God bless you, Janetta.
God bless you.
Thank you so much for joining me today, and inshallah, I really look forward to being with you in a future episode.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.